Hello, it's Senator Ben Cardin, and welcome once again to Facebook Live, which is an opportunity for me on a regular basis to have a conversation about a timely subject before the United States Senate and before the American people. And today I'm very pleased to have as our topic the next steps, small business policing policy, small business policies in the new administration. And as the ranking Democrat on the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, this is a subject of particular interest to me. I am so pleased to have Karen Mills with us. Karen is the former administrator of the Small Business Administration, a senior fellow at Harvard Business School, and a former president, National Economic Council. So she has broad experience in regards to small business matters and in regards to economic policy in this country and how small businesses are intertwined with our economy. And Sharon Pinder, who's the president and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supplier Development Council, which is the link between corporate and government agencies to minority business enterprises, and one of the great leaders in trying to bridge the gap in regards to underserved communities with entrepreneurship. So welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for joining me today. So, Karen, I'm going to start with you and just give you a chance. If President-elect Biden were to ask you, and maybe he already has done that, what would be your advice as to what he should be doing as we're coming out of this COVID pandemic, as our economy is still very much in serious damage? What would be your recommendation as to what type of policies he should be considering in order to help small businesses in our economy?
Well, thank you very much for having me. You know, Senator, I want to thank you for everything that you have done for small business and for your leadership. It needs to be, as you know, at the top of the priority list, and you've made it so in your tenure heading this committee. I don't speak for the Biden administration. I want to make that clear. But I do have a number of thoughts and have had the great honor of being able to give input. And, you know, also had the great honor of serving with Vice President Biden on many, many small business related projects and initiatives. And I know this is going to be a top priority of this next administration. This is the most difficult small business environment that I have seen in my lifetime. And I've seen a few crises. You know, I was in the seat in the first quarter of 2009 when we had the financial crisis, and a number of things that we did then actually are going to be very, very valuable policies to reinstitute now as we move forward to recovery. But there's two steps to this. First, it is, what do we do in this crisis? And as you know, there is another relief bill that needs to help small businesses. And we learned quite a bit from the first bill. We learned some things about how to get the money out into the hands of the smallest and most vulnerable businesses. You know, all businesses are not the same, and the biggest businesses were first in line with some of the banks. And luckily, we had a second tranche of the PPP, and we were able to get a lot of that into the hands of smaller businesses with smaller dollar needs. We had a whole set of people like Square and PayPal and Cabbage that helped us do it. We have to make sure that our distribution through CDFIs, through fintechs, gets into the smallest businesses. And then as we go forward in recovery, we have a whole toolkit that we have to reinstitute. One of those, as you know, was that when credit freezes, small businesses just have nowhere to turn. And as we see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, we have small businesses asking, how am I going to reopen? How am I going to get some money to buy inventory? And we need to make sure credit is flowing to them. There, the SBA can play a critical role, as we did with your help last time. And we raised the guarantee rates to 90, maybe even 95% for community banks, I'm suggesting for this time, just to make sure that these banks don't look at a business and say, oh, well, wait a minute, you haven't had any revenue or you haven't had any profit. You've been having a very bad year. We're not going to lend to you. Well, clearly, the pandemic is going to have damaged some of these businesses. We need to eliminate SBA fees and get those guarantees back up. Keep the capital flowing to small businesses so they can recover.
Well, thank you. We're going to talk about some of these specific issues, but Sharon, I want to bring you into this discussion. The CARES Act was an important ingredient to help small businesses. Karen's pointed out that the underserved community had a hard time accessing these loans that turned into forgivable loans. That capital is critically important, whether they're loans, whether they're grants. But what we've learned from every recession, including the economic downturn from the pandemic, that small businesses are very, very vulnerable. They don't have deep pockets. They don't have the same amount of resiliency as larger companies have. So they're more vulnerable towards economic downturns. But we also have found out that minority small businesses are even in worse shape and have a much longer time to recover. And as we found out in the PPP program, those small businesses that didn't have access to priority banking, or very small companies, maybe individual proprietor, or maybe just a few employees, the banks weren't really terribly interested in giving these individuals these PPP loans, and many of them closed their businesses forever. So we recognize that the progress that we've made in trying to help minority businesses has really been compromised during this pandemic. What do we need to do in order to reach the underserved communities?
Thank you, Senator, for asking that question. And also thank you for the work that you've always been doing as it relates to the underserved communities. But you have talked about a lot of the things. Matter of fact, one of the things that we always say in terms of minority businesses, when from an economic perspective, when America catches a cold, minority businesses catch pneumonia. And so before the pandemic, even coming off of the economic downturn in 2008, our businesses were having a hard time. And so you're absolutely right. There has to be something that's done in particular that's focused on minority businesses, particularly when you look at the fail rate. Just this year alone, 41% of the Black-owned businesses have failed or closed, 32% of Latino-owned businesses, and 26% of Asian-owned businesses against just 17% or 17% of white-owned businesses. And so what we found to be effective is if there's a conscious or intentional or strategic effort to be able to help businesses, because we know that if our minority businesses are successful, that certainly has an impact on minority communities. And so to answer your question specifically, it would be great to understand or to see that from a federal government perspective, that the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency, MBDA, really put things in effect that will help our businesses. Right now, there's some question about its existence past where all the contracts end on March 31st. And so we need something that's specifically held accountable for minority businesses in order for us to get out of where we are now.
So we have a question from one of our listeners that wants to know, what is the unique role of MBDAs, Minority Business Development Agencies? Sharon, you're probably closest to this, but I know that Karen's also been involved with MBDAs. What's their role? Why did you mention them a little bit earlier?
Because the Minority Business Development Agency is the only federally funded agency in the federal government geared specifically toward minority businesses. And so how they help and support providing contracts to or support minority businesses getting contracts is through its business centers. There are about 37 business centers across the country. And as you know, Senator, my organization operates the MBDA Center, Washington, D.C., and we also operate the Federal Procurement Center, the only one of its kind in the country. And so last year, this fiscal year, I believe, MBDA actually had reported $6.9 billion in contracts for minority businesses. And so it becomes an important entity to support and ensure its existence because of the impact that it does have, or the reach it does have across the country and touching minority businesses. We do that through a series of things with the support of business consultants, also with the ability to provide those resources to help build capacity for minority businesses.
And Karen, we have a question here from Celeste from Rockville, who wants to know what lessons have been learned from the pandemic in regards to rebuilding small businesses. You mentioned that the PPP loans originally were not reaching those that didn't have priority banking. What lessons did we learn so far from this pandemic that we should incorporate into policies moving forward? And you're on mute.
Senator, as you know, small businesses really are critical to the economy. Half the people who work in this country own or work for a small business. But all small businesses aren't the same. And one of the things we learned from this pandemic is that the smallest businesses and the most vulnerable very often need the most help. And that help has to be delivered in a way that is accessible to them, that they can easily have a good customer experience. So we need to broaden all the ways that we go and reach out to small businesses with the things that we know will help them. And senators, you know, there are three things. Sharon just talked about another one besides access to capital, which is access to government contracts. It turns out that government contracting is one of the most powerful things that the federal government can do to give small businesses what they need, which is sales, oxygen, money, top line revenue. And that number in the federal government is $100 billion a year. And I also want to comment that it costs taxpayers absolutely nothing, zero, because these are federal contracts which are probably getting done at lower prices. You know, small businesses don't have that big overhead, and you're getting more innovation, and you're getting the attention of the CEO. So rather than give it to a big business and let them subcontract it and take a little bit off the top, you're giving it directly to small businesses. This is where the minority business programs, the advice and counsel that Sharon just described, the 8A program are absolutely critical. And they are going to be part of, I am sure they are going to be part of the Biden effort going forward, because I had the great honor of sitting with Biden as we implemented throughout all the agencies a priority under President Obama for these contracting programs. They'd kind of been ignored before. Happily, after we had some success with them, I've seen even other countries adopt, the UK adopted 25% of all government contracts go to small businesses. So we know that this works, and we are going to have to double down, as Sharon described, on the advice and the counseling that goes with it. Because you can't expect a small business to just like walk in the door absolutely ready for a big government contract. You have to make sure they've got all of the expertise and all of the loans that they need to gear up and get that business.
Well, as you point out, the federal government is actually the largest procurer of goods and services in the world, for number one. And the 23% set aside those goals have been much more, most agencies are meeting those goals. And it was a great record under your leadership at SBA in getting the agencies to respond to the needs of small businesses. So congratulations on that record. It makes a huge difference.
I have to give Vice President, then Vice President, now President-elect Biden some credit for that, because when we decided we were going to make this a priority for the Department of Defense and everyone, he lent a lot of support all the way across all the agencies so that we made sure that there was a change in attitude, that there was a realization. And I will say one other thing under this administration, it appears that SBA will stay in the cabinet, which is a great thing. President Obama put me in my position into the cabinet. Small business needs to have a seat at the table. They need to have a voice because, once again, we're talking about half of American jobs.
You're absolutely right, and you're correct that agency heads, defense being the largest, they don't necessarily want to open up their contractor base or to deal with multiple contractors. They rather just deal with the big guys, and it's a lot easier administratively, they think. And so you really have to have leadership coming out of the White House. And with you or with SBA having a seat at the table in the cabinet, you can make those points and get through as you were able to do under President Obama. So well done. Now, one of my predecessors in the United States House of Representatives was Parent J. Mitchell. I mentioned Parent J. Mitchell because he chaired the Senate House Small Business Committee and was responsible for set-asides for minority small businesses, recognizing that that's a way that you can really develop entrepreneur opportunities, narrow the wealth gap by using the federal procurement system to help minority businesses. And yes, we have met the 23% set aside pretty routinely now in agencies. We don't always meet the minority set asides or the women set asides that we have set up as goals. So Sharon, I guess my point to you, how can we do a better job with the use of procurement to help minority entrepreneurs?
Great question, and thank you. See, I believe that there, unless, and what we've seen over time, and even when Congressman Mitchell introduced the legislation over 30 years ago that initially placed that spending, minority business spend in the federal contracting, unless there is accountability, it won't get done. And so until such time, and I was glad to hear that that the SBA had a cabinet seat. So until that there's accountability, until that there is a seat at the table in regards of all of this, we will continue to have the same conversation. My organization, which is part of the National Minority Supply Development Council, was created about 50 years ago with funds from MBDA. And what I tell people is the problem is it was created to help an issue. But here we are almost 50 years later, we're still having the same conversation. And so until such time that we can do this a little bit differently. The other thing that we know, Senator, is that history has shown us that it's taken government support in order to create or support industries, and whether that was the airline industry or trucking or whatever that was. And so until we have that kind of support, until we have that kind of intentional investment in minority businesses, we'll still have the same conversation over and over again. If I could add just one thing, 8A, I think it's a beautiful thing. One thing that may be taken into consideration is the special A and C 8A. I understand why that was created because of the poverty that was worse in the areas of Indian reservations and Alaskan Native villages. One of the things that we may want to take in consideration, given COVID, given the social injustice, there may need to be an examination of a special 8A program for Black-owned businesses, for minority-owned businesses at the same level. Because if you look at the level of poverty and then what's going to be resulting from this pandemic, I think it may take a special consideration of how we then pay attention or intentionally funnel those kind of resources into minority businesses.
Thank you for that point. That's a great suggestion. We have a question from Harris on Facebook who asks, is there any movement on increasing the contracting ceiling for 8A companies? Before I get your views on that, let me point out the National Defense Authorization Act, which we just went to conference, and we do expect that it will come up in this Congress. There's some issues that are still outstanding with the president. So nothing's a certainty these days, particularly in a lame duck session and with a president who is lame duck as to what will get done. But in that bill is a provision that would extend for 1 year the eligibility under 8A because of the pandemic. So we do get an extension of the program. I was pleased to offer that amendment and it was approved in the NDAA bill. But the question here is, are we looking at ways that we can, I'm going to expand it, ways that we can make the 8A certification program more effective? And I think, Sharon, you already gave us one good suggestion we could set aside. Any other thoughts on how we can make the 8A program more effective?
I think a lot of work has been done relative to ensuring, I know over the years there has been just evidence around ensuring that when businesses graduate from 8A, that they have a diversified portfolio, because there was a fail rate associated with that. And I think that if we can continue to put that attention in terms of the diversification of portfolio, to include not only the public sector, but the private sector, that would be great as well. The other thing, Senator, just kind of off of that, is that if we could even have MBDA be authorized to request reports from agency heads on their minority business spend, I think that would go a long way, again, in terms of requesting accountability, because we know that once that happens, behavior changes.
So I have several questions here dealing with, we need help now. When's the next aid package coming? What's going to be in the next aid package? It seems to be a common theme here. Karen, you mentioned this, the need for additional legislation. So let me set the stage first, if I might. In mid-March, we passed the CARES Act. The CARES Act provided for the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program, which provided substantial help to small businesses, 500 workers or less. Substantial amount, in excess of $500 billion of relief that were forgivable loans. It worked. It was getting money out quickly. There was minimal amount of certification on showing need. Just about any small business could qualify. We wanted to get money out quickly, and we got money out quickly. A new program, it stood up quickly by the Small Business Administration. In addition, of course, that was commercial loans by financial institutions that were guaranteed by the government and forgiven if the monies were spent as directed for payroll and other related expenses. And then we set up an expansion of the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the EIDL program, so that it could provide much larger loans than necessarily the EIDL program, than the PPP program gave in forgivable loans, and long-term, 30 years, so that there could be some capital available to small businesses during this pandemic. And then we recognize, as I think Sharon pointed out, the smaller the small businesses need really special attention. So we set up a grant program under EIDL where we can make cash available pretty quickly to save small businesses that otherwise would not survive. We also forgave for 6 months the loan repayments on existing loans under the SBA. So it was a pretty comprehensive package. And it was, I thought, the right answer. I helped craft it. I have some pride and authorship in this. But we all thought when we passed that, this was in March, that by last summer, our economy would be back on track. So we did this mainly through June, recognizing that by July 1st, Congress is still in session, they need additional help, will be there. But we hoped that the economy would be back on track. Well, as we all know, it's now December and we're not back on track. And these small businesses are desperate for additional help. So the question, and Karen, you raised this initially when you said there are lessons to be learned from how we did the first package. The first question is, should Congress pass another round of help for small businesses? And then secondly, what should be the primary objective in this second round? I'll give you one other parameter that we've been working on. The group of eight that have put up a bipartisan package at $809 billion has about $288 billion for small business. The HEROES Act has more money in it for small business. The Republican bill has about $360 billion in for small business. So it looks like the numbers we're looking at, if we provide relief, would be somewhere between 288 billion and I would say 375 billion. So that's the range and looks like we're operating. Should we do that? And if we do, should we divide the money?
Well, the short answer is yes. Quickly, please. We need to get as much help out into the hands of America's small businesses as quickly as possible. As you know from your work, Senator, small businesses operate with very thin margins, very low cash buffers, and they have depleted just about everything they've got. And they are using every piece of ingenuity they can to stay on track. I said in the beginning I was concerned we would lose between 20 and 30% of our small businesses, and now I'm worried that it's the high end of that range and maybe worse. The only way to get them through to the end of the pandemic, as we begin to see, vaccines come on the market, is with another round of forgivable loans or grants. And we know that it's probably too late to change the mechanism. You put a mechanism out there, it put a lot of loans out. We need to make sure that those mechanisms in PPP work well again, and we need to reinstate the idle grants. There's a few modifications that I would suggest. One is because we all thought this was going to be done in 2 months, we had a lot of restrictions on what you could use the money for. And now we probably don't need those restrictions. Another thing is that large loans went out first. I think this time we need to prioritize getting out the smaller dollar loans and more of the smaller dollar loans. And what we found, I'm going to speak to a bunch of the top economists tomorrow about a paper that was just put out, and it said that the first tranche of PPP did not go into the minority communities. The second tranche of PPP did over-index into the minority communities. We have to pay attention to that. Why did it go in the minority communities? Because more alternative lenders were used, and fintechs had a very good record of getting their money into these communities because they prioritized these small businesses and they made it really easy for them to upload their information and get a loan. So we have to make sure the spending is flexible, that the process is very clear, that we have safeguards against bad actors. We don't want people who are fraudulent or who are public companies or big businesses to get it. But we know some of the ways to guard against that. So more grants now on idle loans. Now, idle loans are terrific. These are the disaster loans. And this same piece of research showed that they were very effective in getting into minority communities, in part because I think some of the communities remember, maybe hurricane relief or other disaster loans, and they were familiar with the SBA. And these are loans that the SBA did directly. But there was one thing I would adjust, which is that they said, even though you asked for $10,000, we're only going to give you $1,000 per employee. Now, this really damaged sole proprietors. And we know that Black-owned businesses, for instance, over-index in being sole proprietors. And just getting $1,000, that didn't move the needle. So I think we have to fix that going forward. The last thing I would say is you mentioned that SBA said they would forgive the payments on 6 months. We probably need another 6 months worth of money to forgive those SBA loan payments. That would be a good package, followed on by those extra loan guarantees I mentioned earlier.
Well, I just want our viewers to know that I didn't set up that answer, but Karen's answer patterns very much legislation that I filed with some of my colleagues for the next round that is included in the Heroes 2.0 package that passed the House in September. So, and we're going to talk about some of those specific provisions. Let me again thank everybody for joining us on Facebook Live. My guests are Karen Mills, the former SBA Administrator and now a Senior Fellow at Harvard Business School, and Sharon Pinder, who's the President and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Suppliers Development Council. Sharon, before I go through some of the provisions that are in that legislation and the prospects for it, what are the most effective provisions we could put in the next round of help for small businesses that would help underserved communities?
You said, what is the most effective?
What tools work best in underserved communities if we're going to do a new round of relief?
A lot of what Karen said in relaxing some of those restrictions and availability and accessibility. Part of what happened with that first round was, and we all know, and I just saw a report just came out recently, I think it was yesterday, that who really received the PPP loans and all of that kind of stuff. But it's a matter of trust in the underserved communities as well. Senator, I sit on a loan committee with the Ms. Bitfa, and we had COVID money from the state's perspective, and it was very intentional for those businesses, those small businesses, to be able to get that money from trusted partners within the community that they were familiar with. And I think if we are intentional about making sure that those entities that are accessible in underserved communities are equipped with that kind of funding to help with those businesses, it may go a long way without minority businesses jumping through hoops. Because by the time, and in some of these cases, what I found, by the time we require a lot of these things, they're out of business.
So Senator Rubio, who's the Republican chair of the committee, and I'm the Democratic ranking member, senior Democrat, the two of us have been negotiating and working good faith if there's a second COVID package, what the small business provisions will look like. Both of us would like to see the most robust package possible because we know how desperate small businesses are. So we would like to have that 375 to 400 billion or more range rather than the 288 billion, the 300 billion range. But we are in agreement with a lot of what both of you have talked about, and that is we would use the existing mechanism. Because Karen, you're right, to try to step up start up new programs now, it's a little late. So we would use the existing mechanisms, but we want to target the program more effectively because it's not now our objective to get money out to a broad number of small businesses. It's to help those small businesses that really need the help. So we're looking at targeting it with two major changes in eligibility. One would be size. The report that Sharon, you just mentioned that came out recently showed that the larger small businesses took the lion's share of the monies. And yet we know the more vulnerable small businesses are the smaller of the small businesses. So we're looking at an eligibility standard between 200 and 300 employees rather than 500 employees in order to, again, target it to the smaller companies. But even within the total program, we would reserve a certain amount of the money exclusively for those small businesses, 10 workers or less, so that you can't crowd out the smaller small businesses by getting to the loan window early. So that's one change in eligibility. The second is to have a revenue loss standard as a result of COVID-19. We think that we should be helping those businesses that depend upon larger gatherings or larger numbers that they're not able to get out, so that if there was somewhere between 25 to 35% revenue loss during COVID-19, they would be eligible for the loan. And we are very much in agreement with both of you when you say we should expand the eligibility for the use of the funds. We agree with you there. This is before it was paycheck protection. Now it's small business survival. So we think we should give them broader discretion on how they can spend those dollars. And then lastly, both of you have mentioned this, we will allocate a certain amount of the funds for mission lenders, the CDFIs, and those that have a community function in reaching the underserved and underbanked community. That's pretty much an agreement between Senator Rubio and me. We have some differences as to whether we expand the eligibilities to other classes, and we can talk a little bit about that. Where we really need to still resolve our differences is on the EIDL program, because you're absolutely right. The EIDL program reaches the smaller of the small businesses. The proof of the pudding is that the grant program that you referred to that only provided $1,000 for a sole proprietor was meant to provide $10,000. And the average grant under the EIDL program was about $4,500. So the average size of a business was between 4 and 5 employees. We need to do a better job and make that full $10,000 available for those companies so they can survive. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, but $10,000 is a matter of survival for a small business. And then we also want to increase the capacity of the EIDL program so that it's available. Right now, it's run out of capacity, so we have to put more money into the EIDL program. So, and then on the loan forgiveness, you're exactly right. We have $9 billion reserved that hasn't been spent yet under the original appropriation. We do think another 6 months on loan forgiveness makes sense. So, as I said, when Karen gave the explanation, she was reading from the summary of my bill. I appreciate that very much. So, let's talk beyond that. What do we do in addition to that? And what is the prospects for even this getting done? Just to point out that we have a group of bipartisan, bicameral legislators that this past week have come up with a $908 billion package. They call it the 908 proposal. That includes state and local government, includes unemployment insurance, and includes our schools. It includes vaccines, our healthcare providers. It includes those type of areas, and includes small business. And although I don't think it's enough money, it will bridge until the Biden administration takes office. And I support the proposal because we got to get something done, and we got to stop this partisan division and get Senator McConnell to bring a bill up on the floor of the Senate. So I am hopeful we'll be able to bring that up. And if we can, that will at least get us to next year, and then we can work on the next bill with President Biden. So talk about additional tools that might be helpful, that some things we should be looking at in addition to what I just said. Sharon, you mentioned the MBDAs. MBDAs exist by executive order. There is no legislation that gives them the legal authority, and that puts it on shaky grounds. How important is it that we codify and expand the minority business development agencies?
I think it is supremely important, Senator. Right now, all of our contracts, and that's the contracts of the business centers across the country, expire on March 31st. So on March 31st, if nothing is done, for example, not only will the support of minority businesses from the only minority business agency in the federal government kind of go away, but the impact of the centers and those people that it employ will actually do that as well. And so this effort of this continual resolution of the agency puts it at risk each and every time. And so for 50 years, it has not had the stability that it's needed. And as a result of that, it's quite often seems like it's an afterthought that is not taken seriously. And and thank you very much for that legislation. So until there is, in my opinion, that is codified, we're at risk every budget cycle. And so it's very important, I think, to make sure that it's done.
Karen, those recent figures that I've seen show that only 3% of the venture capital in this country go to Black or Hispanic-owned businesses. That's just unacceptable. We know we have a wealth gap in America. We know that wealth gap actually has gotten worse during the pandemic. So entrepreneurship is a way to bridge the wealth gap. You mentioned as one of your first priorities for, you hope, the Biden administration is to deal with capital for businesses and how we get capital into minority businesses. So I've introduced two proposals that I want to promo because this is my show on Facebook Live, so I can promote things. And one is the Office of Emerging Markets. The other is the Uplift Program. The Office of Emerging Markets is to establish a presence within the Small Business Administration for minority businesses to be able to get venture capital partnerships in the emerging markets so that we do a better job in reaching the underserved community in the area of emerging markets, which is basically where we have capital, venture capital. The Uplift Bill is an effort to partner between the private sector, the Small Business Administration, and HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to establish entrepreneurship opportunities within minority communities. So just mention both of those issues as potential initiatives. I'll just alert you, I've written President-elect Biden about these two proposals, so I'm going to be pushing them with the next administration. But I think these are currently real areas where we have need that has not been met with the existing tools under the SBA.
Well, I am so excited to hear you bring up so many creative programs, Senator. I'm going to look forward to taking a look at these. We need to do a much better job at getting venture capital and risk capital into the hands of high growth businesses that are women owned, that are minority owned, and particularly that are Black owned. And some students of mine at Harvard Business School actually ran a new venture competition for Black new ventures, and they got 300 small founders, early stage ventures to come, and we got some venture capital companies to put up some prizes. And it was unbelievable how much talent there was in the founder community. So I think doing a similar kind of thing under the auspices, but supercharged under the auspices of the SBA, and also putting more attention into getting minority venture capital firms started under the SBIC program. And under some of the modifications we made, that program was running pretty well, but we need a much more diverse set of funds designed to go out to minority ventures. I have one other program that is not in a bill yet, but I've been talking to mayors and governors about, and it's called Restart America. And it's for minority business owners and all small business owners, and really designed for Main Street, where you've got a bunch of shuttered, storefronts. What are we going to do to make sure that entrepreneurs get a fresh ability to look at those storefronts and say, I could start a business there? So I propose $10,000 grants given through a competition, but that we allow these competitions to be run locally. So you might give $10,000 to the local Main Street Association. You say, you run the competition however you want. You designate a storefront. You say you want competition to make entrepreneurs come in with a business plan. You'll get at least, 10 or 20 business plans. You'll give entrepreneurs a sense of excitement. And you can do this in communities of color. You can do these in underserved communities in conjunction with CDFIs and other players who already know where those great entrepreneurs are. They just need a little juice. They need a $10,000 prize and a sense of excitement and some support. And we need to look forward and see if we can't get these entrepreneurs a way to get into that storefront and do a little fixing up and open the place of their dreams. So Restart America, that was my idea.
I love it. Okay.
And it's
We'll
not
trade off
very
some.
expensive, Senator. It's not very
Yeah.
expensive.
Well, it's amazing what a program like that can mean in new opportunities. One of our proposals was to provide funds to state and local government for grants to small businesses targeted to those that are under a certain size in underserved communities, so that we could have the local governments determine where the best needs are to meet in underserved communities. And your idea is a similar one in which you can get a small amount of money to really make a difference in serving a community that otherwise would not get the interest of the private sector financing. Sharon, there are several programs that we have today. We have the 7A program, great program, but minority businesses don't do very well under the 7A program percentage-wise. We have the 7A Community Development Program that really do much better. These are smaller loans, less bureaucracy, but that's a temporary program. That's not a permanent program. And then we have microloans where minority businesses do very well. Again, small amount of funds. So some of our ideas are, why don't we expand the microloan program? Why don't we make the 7A Community Development Program permanent and figure out a way we can make the 7A more accessible to minority businesses? What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. Accessibility is kind of key. And like Karen, I love the ideas that you're talking about in terms of the programs that you're trying to do, particularly with, and Senator, it may also be kind of where some of these programs exist. I would believe that a lot of people just don't know about them. And some of the things you're talking about, perhaps they should exist under MBDA, for example. When you talk about the tie to the HBCUs, I mean, that is just something that hasn't really happened as well. With historically Black colleges and universities, we have to do a better job in terms of tech transfer. And so when you do those kinds of things, I think it helps with positioning minority businesses for emerging markets and the longer term effects of things. So it may depend on, I don't know, kind of where it is. And maybe you can target some like $1 million grants to projects that address the health in the minority business community, particularly after COVID and what's happening with testing and the distribution of the vaccine and those things as well. But getting back to what you were talking about, the 7J program, or those programs that are, I think under SBA, you might want to take a look at positioning it under MBDA.
Good suggestion. And we, of course, would want to codify MBDA so that you have the legal basis. That's a good suggestion. It's
One
interesting.
thought, Senator, on that 7A program you just mentioned. I really think you're onto something on community advantage. This is the 7A program at the SBA that makes sure they use lenders in the local community. And one of the things that we saw in this second tranche of PPP, one of the lessons learned is that you've got to get the loans out through those trusted intermediaries. But I think even more than the micro lenders, we have a new element that did not exist when I was in office, and that is the amount of loans going out through Square and PayPal. PayPal tracks 10 million of America's small businesses out of the 30 million. And we've got Stripe now. We've got so many other ways. And what we saw in the data is that in PPP, this is where the minority-owned businesses got their PPP money. So we cannot forget them as a distribution channel. Now, I love the banks, and they were my great partners, but we need more partners who are willing to do a very small dollar loan. Square does on average $6,000 loans. You can't ask Bank of America to do a $6,000 loan. It just doesn't work for them. So we need to expand our access points. We need to make it easy for the small business who, can't Xerox a mountain of paperwork anymore. to access that. And a lesson learned from our PPP is that we have the ability to do that through trusted intermediaries from this fintech community. QuickBooks was another player who did a very nice job. These people live and die with our small businesses, and we need to make sure that they are aligned with us to get the service into the hands of the access into the hands of the smallest businesses, the most underserved, particularly the Black businesses, because that's how we're going to get wealth creation. That's how we're going to get opportunity. And that's how we're going to get more people to be able to live the American dream.
But if I can also add to that, I totally agree. And the other thing we need to probably perhaps think about is some of those wraparound services that will go along with that. Because what we've also found is that when people did do the loans, that part of it was then now what kind of afterwards, because of the domino effect it had in their businesses, you know, what to do with the workforce, what to do with, and then in some cases, the forgiveness piece of PPP is confusing as well. And so I think on the back end of that, you have to have some support structure or ensure that we're more intentional about that support structure to kind of help with this altogether.
I think they're excellent points. We recognize that financial institutions are critically important to the success of small businesses. We recognize that. Government cannot be the financier of businesses. So we recognize that. But we also learned that when you depend upon commercial lenders, as we did in the PPP program, the points that were raised by Karen, that if it's a very small loan, are they really interested in doing all that paperwork? We were told the cost factors far exceed the loan itself, the processing. So unless you're going to provide a very high percentage of reimbursement on cost, it's going to be not financially worthwhile for a bank to do a small loan. So that really shut them out. The sole proprietor and the company with 2 or 3 workers, they just couldn't get a large enough loan together for a commercial bank to be interested. And on the 7A programs, we've done everything we can to make it attractive for the lenders. It's 90% guaranteed by the government. We've changed that even. We're doing everything to make it as easy and painless as possible for the commercial institutions, but yet the cost to the small business to do a 7A loan is pretty high. And that's why the fee waivers, and we put fee waivers into the budget, but at times we've had problems with the OMB, with the administration on covering the costs of fees, which shuts out the smaller businesses from getting 7A loans. So that's why I come back to the EIDL program being so important. Why? Because EIDL are made by the SBA. You don't have to go to a commercial lender. It's a service that they provide. And that's why the EIDL program is critically important, that we provide enough financial support to keep that program viable as we move forward. And yes, we should make sure the fee waivers are available for the 7A program and make the commercial loans as available as we possibly can. I have a question here that I want to get to from James from Largo that talks about returning citizens. And I want to do this because to me, this is one of the great injustices in our system. A person who has violated our laws, has paid the price and has returned to our community and now wants to be a participant in our community. And one of the ways is to be able to start a business and to be part of the American economic fiber. And yet we have rules under the Small Business Administration that prevents a business owner who has a criminal record from getting participating in these loans. The question that's asked by James, is this fair? What should we do about it? Now, I can give you the background on what we were able to do in with working with the Trump administration. We were able to get an easing up of the rules from reducing the number of years that it disqualified a convicted felon of ineligibility for loans. But our point was that if it didn't involve a financial crime, why is there any disqualification from a person who has paid his price to society or her price to society? Why should there be any disqualifications for returning citizens participating in SBA governmental programs? Any justification why we just shouldn't remove this prohibition altogether, other than for financial crimes that involve fraud in getting loans? Karen, why don't you start? You ministered these programs in the past.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought this up because this is something that I have heard that the administration, the new administration, and as you just suggested, even up till now is reconsidering. We really need to use every tool that we can to provide access and opportunity for somebody who's coming back into society. We want them to be successful. Entrepreneurship, sometimes it's hard to find a job. So maybe entrepreneurship is the most important way to, be self-employed. And these are really critical pathways. I think this is something you could absolutely put in your bill.
Sharon, I don't know if this comes up in where you are. I assume that we have individuals who have returning to society and want to start businesses.
Absolutely. And when we look, and particularly in the African American community, and the disproportionate number of people who have been locked up or serving time, I think, to Karen's point, this is another tool in the toolkit by which we can do it. So absolutely, and thank you for the legislation that you had introduced around this. But some of the best minds have earlier in their lives faced some challenges, and they ought not be punished for something that they've paid. They have actually made their payment to society. And why not? Sole proprietorship, entrepreneurship is the best solution in support of wealth creation in this country. And so I don't believe that returning citizens should be deprived of the opportunity to create wealth.
Well, let me thank both of our guests. What an incredible discussion about the opportunities for small business policies under the Biden-Harris administration. We know that they are going to be sensitive to many of the issues we've talked about. We've already had conversations with the transition team in regards to some of these issues. Some of these matters can be addressed by executive order. Others will take legislation in Congress. But I thought we had some really great discussions on how we can help small businesses, the growth engine of our economy, where more jobs are created and innovation takes place, and how we can target this to the traditionally underserved communities. So when we come out of this pandemic, we find that we've made progress, but have not fallen behind in reducing the opportunity gaps that exist in this country in minority communities and underserved communities. My guests today have been Karen Miles, who's the former SBA Administrator, and what a pleasure it was for me to work with her when she held that position. She's now a senior fellow at Harvard Business School. And Sharon Pinder, who's the president and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Suppliers Development Council. I thank both of you for sharing your thoughts and giving me a lot of good ideas on what we can pursue under the Biden-Harris administration. Thank you all, and thank you for being with us on Facebook Live.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.